Hey there, welcome to the garden. Today I wanted to talk about garden layout and garden planning. If you've been following along, you know that I am starting this garden out here, or I have started this garden out here completely 100% from scratch. When I got here in January, it was just a blank piece of concrete, and it is now nearing sort of the end of April, and we have life. We have that beautiful stillwater clematis just about to bloom. There's lots of fun things happening in containers, lots of seeds coming up, and I just added a couple more, three more actually, raised beds to the garden space. And today I am going to put them in their final location and go ahead and fill them up with potting soil and also move some of my containers. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of my thoughts when you're putting together a container garden or really any garden layout like this, just sort of the process of getting it started and what to think about. So the first thing, of course, is space. How much growing space you have and how much you can fit in that space or pack into that space if you were like me. And so that's why I started with the two 2x6 raised beds. Those are those two big troughs, which have been working really well. And then I still had a bit of room here in my garden space, and so I've added these three raised beds. We've got a 2x2 raised bed here, it's just under 2x4 raised bed, and another 2x2 raised bed. And I am going to move some of these containers forward here now that I've got the all the containers in the garden space. And when I'm thinking about laying out, especially a container garden, it's really important to think about the direction which you're looking at the garden. The way I have the camera here, this is where I'm usually looking at the garden. And so I've started with the higher things in the back and then bringing the next size down, and then we'll put the smaller containers right along here on the front, kind of like grouped around the front of these bigger containers. I did go ahead and put these raised beds out here and kind of left them for the whole week just to make sure I liked the layout. I think when you've got a small garden space, at least to my eye, keeping things as kind of balanced and symmetrical has been a way that I've tried to just make it restful. Because it's a small garden space, it can be easy for it to get kind of cluttered. And so I've often gone for like repeats. We've got the 2 and then we've got the 3, keeping them in sort of a symmetrical pattern, and then trying to keep the colors within a little bit of a range so that I'm not just getting a green and a blue and a pink and a purple and whatever. So I've got the galvanized, we've got this beautiful pearl Vego raised beds, which are awesome. And then I've got a couple more galvanized containers, as you can see, some terracotta and some black, and I'm keeping that look cohesive. And then we're just changing up the size of the containers, and that's what keeps it interesting, so that it's not just totally formal, because, well, there is something really beautiful about a formal garden. This is, after all, the reckless garden, and we like to keep things like a little bit more casual. So there's different sizes, and I've just allowed myself to pick out different containers that are the right size, honestly, for the plants that I'm trying to grow in. And that ultimately is, the biggest piece as well, right? I mean, you've got to have containers for the plants that you want to grow. Hence why I have a couple raised beds, well, a few raised beds now, because I want to grow some of those bigger things like tomatoes and squash and peppers. And while you can grow them in containers, it's nice to have a little bit bigger growing spaces in the raised bed form. The last thing when I'm doing this layout that I'm thinking about, and probably like the biggest thing when it comes to actually having a successful garden for the plants, is the sunlight. I really got lucky in this garden that the direction in which I am looking at the garden space is also the direction that works best for the sunlight. Obviously, we've got this big fence here, and that does cast some shade. So the further we move out here into the middle of the cement portion of the space, the more sunlight the plants get throughout the day. So that actually worked out perfectly as we do kind of this like step system down here with the additional raised beds. They're actually getting the best sunlight available too, and so that just worked out. So what I'm going to do now, I think I'm just going to put a time lapse on, and I'm going to go ahead and put these containers into their kind of final location. I didn't really measure out precisely the distance between the raised beds, so I want to go ahead and measure that distance and make sure that's even. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill them with soil. I'm also thinking about the space that I have between them. I'm trying to give myself a decent amount of space. Well, it can feel like, wow, that's a lot of walking space between the raised beds. Once these plants start growing, they're gonna encroach a lot on this space. I know the first time that I planned out a garden, I did not account. Well, one, I had no room, so I didn't really have an option, but I did not really account mentally for how much the plants spill out of a raised bed, whether it's a true vine that's actually like growing out of the bed, or even a tomato or a pepper that starts to lean and branch. They do come a foot, even 2 feet out of the raised bed. So a lot of times you'll see these gardens with these big walkways, and it may feel excessive, but it's actually kind of nice, because if you've got a 4-foot walkway and the plants are reaching at least a foot, if not 2, from each raised bed, you know, that fills up your whole 4-foot wide walkway pretty quickly. So I'm gonna, without taking up my entire backyard space, I am gonna go ahead and give myself, I don't know, I think I might actually leave the amount of space that I have here. I kind of like the just having a lot of room. And then I also have this line in the concrete, so I think I'll just line things up with that line, and that'll make it a little easier to do the layout too. So 2 other things that you want to think about when you're planning out the walkways in your garden are any features that you have, like your hose, your garden shed, big items that are going to be in your garden that you're going to need to work around, and then where you want to add some little touches of like whimsy and fun. So definitely, if you've got a hose bib, if you've got a garden shed, and if you have an area that you walk every day, or maybe you need to get your lawnmower from one area of the yard to another, all those things like that are going to be really important in enjoying your garden long term, and they're so much harder to fix once you've got everything in place. So like I did with laying out the empty raised beds earlier for, you know, a week or 2, or you can draw with spray paint onto the ground, mark it out with cones or anything like that. It just is an important step in your process, and definitely one that you want to make sure you don't forget. I feel like it's, at least for someone like me, that's like the easiest thing to forget, and then realize, oh my gosh, I can't water these containers because now my hose won't reach. The other thing is thinking about whether you want to add something like an arched trellis or a fountain, any of those kind of features. Think about those beforehand too, because again, it'll just make it easier. I like to have something in my garden that creates a line of eyesight, something that pulls your view into the garden. Right now I just have like this little birdhouse, but as you can see, it's something to draw your eye through the garden. And it just helps to create interest. It's those little details that really make a garden special and make it unique. If you've got something you particularly love that you want to add into the garden, go ahead and make that part of the plan from the beginning. Of course, gardens are always changing, and I will be moving containers around this garden. I definitely want to add an arch trellis and some other things. But if you know I'm always going to want to do a pond, it's okay to have that pond in plan, even if you don't do it for, I don't know, even years. If you know where you want to have it, go ahead and plan from it right from the start. I've definitely always been glad if I can make those kind of like plans in advance, and then not, build all my raised beds up and then have to move them. Everything gets harder once it's put in place permanently, obviously. So it was something that I thought about with this garden. It's a 1-year garden. Don't have any long-term plans, so that made that part of it easier, but it's something to think about if you've got a more long-term garden than mine. All right, and now to a time lapse of me measuring and filling up these garden beds. Here we go. Okay, it looks kind of open, at least to my eye. It looks like a lot of space in between things, and I do definitely need to come in and hose this down and clean it up. But once everything gets growing up, that space is not going to feel too much at all. I went ahead with 3 feet in between these, and then I don't know quite, I didn't actually measure this, but I think we're probably at about 3 or 4 feet in between here. So a nice space, and yeah, I will spray this all down and clean it up. A nice little bit of kind of distance, and then I just went ahead and clumped some containers next to each of these raised beds just to add, you know, a little feel of sort of, I don't know, like grounding and anchoring of each of the big raised beds in place, so that it feels just a little whimsical and kind of fun. So I like that mix of like the real structure with the raised beds and then the clumpings of different containers. I do try to tend to go for, you know, groups of 3s or so. I love these containers that have a little bit of like the topiary form, which definitely having containers that have some height in them, whether it's a plant or a topiary form, add that nice like difference of sizes in a garden. I went ahead and moved this one back because I'm actually not sure if the plants will do better in a little bit more shade up next to the fence, so I'm kind of toying around with that. But I also think the last piece of this garden is going to be a nice big arch trellis right here, tying the 2 trough planters together. The fun thing about container gardening, and one of the reasons I love it, is that you can have these, you know, big raised beds in place, but then I can move these containers around throughout the season as much as I want and totally change the look and feel of the garden. I can swap plants in and out as the season goes on, and that will also change the look, the feel, and kind of just the whole garden in general, which will be really fun. But this now this feels like a garden. It's so interesting. When I had the 2 troughs, it still sort of felt like planters, and definitely like a good amount of gardening space. I was excited to have it. But now that I've got the 5 raised beds, I feel like, okay, we've got, for me, coming from my last garden, definitely this feels huge. I know it's not a big garden by any means, but it feels really massive to me, and I feel super grateful and excited to be able to start growing in it. Now you will notice I didn't fill these raised beds completely with soil, and the only reason for that is that this is actually a temporary garden for me. We are going to be moving back to Virginia next year, and so just because of the cost of potting soil, I decided to just not fill them all the way because I'm not going to be growing in them again next season. So it seemed like kind of a lot of money for what it is. And these are 17-inch tall raised beds, so even halfway full, I think they're going to give plenty of soil space for one season of growing for the, you know, eggplants and such that I'm going to grow in here. I do get to decide next what to plant in these raised beds, which is going to be great. And I need to kind of freshen up the containers. I feel like some of them are getting a little tired, and so we're just now getting into the real garden season, and so it's going to be time to kind of let things get going and maybe bring in some more annuals. Some nice big summer annuals would be fun to add to the space and just kind of brighten it up and everything. But I just wanted to show you that process, you know, creating the symmetry with the big pieces of the garden space and then adding in the whimsy with the little containers is a good formula if you're getting started with creating a raised bed garden, or any kind of garden, even in-ground garden as you're shaping the beds. That's applicable. It can be a little intimidating to come up with the garden layout in the garden space. I definitely felt like when I started with just a blank garden, it was a lot. It was almost like analysis paralysis. There were so many different options and so many directions I could go. But I've actually really enjoyed the way that I have done this garden, and I may do that in the future, just starting with one piece and then adding a next, and living in the space for a while, living with the layout, making sure I like it before I make it permanent has really worked. It's made it more manageable for me. And then, you know, once you get one piece, like once I got the troughs going, then everything else kind of just fell into line. Then you just get the next container and the next raised bed, and it starts to grow from there. And so I definitely didn't start off with one huge vision. It's developed as I've gone along, but I've really enjoyed that, and it's actually been a really fun way to create this garden. So that is the garden space right now. I need to do a little bit of cleanup, a little bit of touch-ups, but for an end of April garden, coming from nothing, I feel like we're doing well. We've got a good start going, and now it's just a matter of getting some crazy big tomato plants and squashes and everything growing in here. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.